where I can see him right now. You think this is a game?
Officer, I am going to ask you one time to step back from this vehicle.
You don't get to ask me anything. Get out of the car.
My name is Coleman. I'm a United States Federal District Court judge. Get off of me.
At exactly 11:47 on a Tuesday night, on the eastbound stretch of Meridian Boulevard in Crestfield County, a traffic stop that should have lasted no more than 4 minutes turned into a career-ending catastrophe that would shake an entire sheriff's department to its foundation. The dash cam footage, the body camera footage, and the audio recordings from that night would later go viral, racking up over 42 million views across social media platforms in less than a week. But this was not your typical traffic stop video. There was no high-speed chase. There was no drug bust. There was no dramatic foot pursuit through a neighborhood. This was a black man in a luxury vehicle, stopped on a dark road by an officer who had already made up his mind about who he was looking at before he even stepped out of his cruiser. What made it different was what the officer did not know. He had no idea who was sitting behind that wheel. And by the time he found out, there was nothing he could do to take back what he had already done. What happened next would shock the Crestfield County Sheriff's Department, spark a federal civil rights investigation, and prove once again that a badge does not make you untouchable, and that knowledge of the law is the most powerful weapon any citizen can carry. Before we continue, do me a favor and drop a comment letting me know where you are watching from. And if you have not subscribed yet, please hit that button right now because this story gets significantly more intense, and you are going to want to see every part of it. Marcus A. Coleman was not your average 48-year-old. While most people his age were winding down after long careers, Marcus was at the absolute peak of his. He had been appointed to the United States District Court for the Eastern District by the President of the United States 6 years prior, confirmed by the Senate, and had spent his career building one of the most respected legal records in the region. He had graduated summa cum laude from Howard University at 21. He earned his law degree from Yale, where he finished in the top 3% of his class. He spent 8 years as a federal prosecutor before transitioning to civil rights litigation, where he won landmark cases that set precedent still cited in courtrooms today. He had clerked for a Supreme Court justice. He had been a keynote speaker at the National Bar Association. He had been profiled in 3 major national publications as one of the most consequential legal minds of his generation. Marcus Coleman was also a man who had spent his entire adult life watching how the law was applied differently depending on who was standing in front of it. He had prosecuted cases where that disparity was the central fact. He had read the briefs. He had heard the testimony. He knew exactly, in clinical and precise detail, what his rights were during a traffic stop, what an officer was legally permitted to do, and exactly where the line between lawful policing and a civil rights violation was drawn. He carried that knowledge not with arrogance, but with the quiet steadiness of someone who had earned it through decades of work. On the night of the incident, it was a Tuesday in late October. Marcus had been attending a federal judicial conference held at the Crestfield Grand Hotel, about 12 miles from his home. The conference had run long, as they often do when federal judges get together to argue about procedure and precedent, and by the time he said goodnight to his colleagues and walked to his car, it was nearly 11:30. The night air was cool and sharp, carrying the smell of autumn leaves and the faint hum of the highway in the distance. He was tired but calm, thinking about a ruling he needed to finish drafting by Thursday. He put on his seatbelt, adjusted the mirror, and pulled out of the hotel parking lot onto Meridian Boulevard. He was not speeding. He was not swerving. He had not run any lights. Every single element of his driving was lawful and measured. He was simply a black man in a late-model black Mercedes sedan, driving home alone on a quiet road after 11 at night. And that, apparently, was enough. The flashing blue and red lights appeared in his rearview mirror about 2 miles past the hotel. Marcus pulled over immediately and calmly, easing the car onto the gravel shoulder with the precision of someone who understood that every movement matters. He rolled down his window, placed both hands on the steering wheel at 10 and 2, and waited. His heart did not race with panic. It raced with the particular alertness of a black man in America who knows exactly what a traffic stop at midnight can become. The officer who approached that vehicle was Derek Holt, a 12-year veteran of the Crestfield County Sheriff's Department. Holt had spent most of his career patrolling this stretch of the county, and by most accounts from his colleagues, he was known for running a tight stop, meaning he liked control, he liked compliance. He liked the stops where people were scared and apologetic and handed over everything he asked for before he even finished the sentence. He was not known for patience with people who asked questions. He was not known for tolerating what he described in internal memos as attitude from drivers. For Derek Holt, these stops were routine. They were transactions. He held the power, the driver acknowledged it, and everyone went home. That was how it worked. Or at least, that is how it had always worked before tonight. Holt approached the driver's side window and did not greet Marcus. He did not say good evening. He did not explain why he had pulled the vehicle over, and he did not ask for license and registration in the standard professional manner. Instead, the first thing out of his mouth was a demand. He said, "Where are you coming from and where are you going?" His tone was already loaded with something that had nothing to do with traffic enforcement. Marcus Coleman remained completely calm. He looked at the officer and said, "Good evening. I am happy to provide my license and registration. Could you please tell me the reason for the stop first?" This is where things began to unravel for Derek Holt, because that question, that perfectly reasonable, perfectly legal, completely non-aggressive question, was apparently not something he was prepared to answer, because the truth was, he did not have a clean answer. Holt later claimed in his report that he had pulled Marcus over for a lane departure, but the dashcam footage showed Marcus driving in a straight, consistent line the entire time. There was no lane departure. There was no moving violation. There was no lawful basis for the stop at all. Holt ignored the question entirely and said, "I need you to step out of the vehicle." Marcus did not move. He said, "I am not required to exit the vehicle unless you are placing me under arrest. Are you placing me under arrest, officer?" Holt stepped closer to the door, his hand moving to his belt, and his voice dropping into that particular register that officers sometimes use when they want someone to understand the implied threat behind the words. He said, "I am not going to ask you again. Step out. Now." Marcus kept his hands visible on the steering wheel and said clearly and calmly, "I am not going to exit this vehicle unless I am under arrest or you have a lawful basis to compel my exit. You have not stated one. I am asking again, what is the reason for this stop?" At this point, something shifted in Derek Holt. The footage makes it visible. You can see it in the set of his shoulders, in the way his jaw tightened. He had asked twice, the driver had refused twice, and instead of doing what training and law and basic professional judgment required, which was to articulate the reason for the stop and de-escalate, he decided to escalate. He stepped back, and then he reached down and unholstered his tactical flashlight. And in one motion that would be watched 42 million times over the next 7 days, he swung it hard against the driver's side window of Marcus Coleman's Mercedes, shattering it completely. Before I continue, quick question for you watching. If you were sitting in that car, knowing your rights, knowing you had done absolutely nothing wrong, what would you have done in that moment? Drop your answer in the comments below. The glass exploded inward. The sound on the body cam was sharp and jarring, and in the 2 seconds after the window shattered, Derek Holt drew his firearm and pointed it directly at Marcus Coleman, a 48-year-old black man sitting calmly with his hands on the steering wheel, wearing a dress shirt and a tie, in a vehicle that contained no contraband, no weapons, no drugs, and no evidence of any crime whatsoever. And then Marcus Coleman did something that Derek Holt had never encountered in 12 years of traffic stops. He did not cry, he did not beg, he did not tremble. He turned his head slowly toward the barrel of that gun, looked Officer Derek Holt directly in the eye, and said, in a voice as steady as a courtroom, "I want you to listen to me very carefully. Reach into the back seat, you will find a leather satchel. Inside that satchel is my judicial credentials wallet. I am asking you to look at it before either one of us says another word." Holt hesitated. Something in the tone stopped him. He did not comply immediately, but he did not fire either. He stood there, gun extended, and Marcus continued. He said, "My name is Marcus A. Coleman. I am a sitting United States Federal District Court judge for the Eastern District. The weapon you are pointing at me is pointed at a federal officer. I am telling you this not to intimidate you, but because I need you to understand the gravity of what is happening right now. You have just committed a warrantless destruction of private property. You are currently pointing a loaded firearm at a person you have not placed under arrest and who has committed no crime. I am asking you one final time to please lower your weapon and retrieve my credentials from the back seat." Holt lowered the weapon. Not fully, not immediately, but enough. He was confused now. The confidence that had carried him from his cruiser to that window was gone. He told Marcus to stay still and reached carefully into the back seat, pulled out the satchel, and unzipped it. Inside was a federal judicial credentials card with Marcus Coleman's photograph, his name, his title, his court seal, and the signature of the President of the United States. Holt stared at it for a long moment. The body cam caught every second of his face in that moment, and what it showed was not remorse. It was not apology. It was pure, cold, dawning panic. This is the moment everything changed. Derek Holt had done this before. Maybe not the window, maybe not the gun, but the stop without cause. The demand for compliance without explanation. The escalation of force against a black man who dared to ask a question. He had done it before, and it had always ended the same way. The person complied, or they were arrested, and either way, Holt went home and nobody said much about it. But tonight, he had smashed the window of and drawn a firearm on a sitting federal judge. A judge who knew every single law that had just been violated. A judge who had the vocabulary, the credentials, the connections, and the absolute legal standing to do something about it. The encounter ended not with an arrest, not with an apology, but with Derek Holt standing on the side of Meridian Boulevard, watching Marcus Coleman's Mercedes pull away, and knowing, somewhere underneath all of that professional armor, that his career had just ended on a dark road at midnight. The entire encounter had lasted 19 minutes. 19 minutes that would cost Derek Holt everything. Now, most people who have a gun pulled on them during a traffic stop go home shaking. They call a friend. They calm down. Maybe they file a complaint months later, if they ever do at all. Marcus Coleman was not most people. By the time he arrived home that night, glass still on his lap from the shattered window, he had already composed the outline in his head. He sat down at his desk at 12:45 in the morning, and he began to write. What he produced was not a simple citizen complaint form. It was a 27-page formal complaint submitted simultaneously to the Crestfield County Sheriff's Department Internal Affairs Division, the State Attorney General's Office, the United States Department of Justice Civil Rights Division, and the Federal Bureau of Investigation. It cited 14 separate potential violations, cross-referenced with specific statutes, case law, and the precise time-stamped moments from what he knew would be on both the dash cam and body cam footage. It was the kind of document that a senior civil rights attorney would charge $40,000 to draft. Marcus Coleman wrote it before sunrise. The Sheriff's Department's Internal Affairs Division received the complaint on a Wednesday morning. By Friday afternoon, Derek Holt had been placed on administrative leave. That was 48 hours, in a department where internal investigations routinely took 6 to 8 months just to reach the preliminary review stage. 48 hours was unheard of, but Marcus Coleman's complaint was so precise, so detailed, and so legally airtight that Captain Rachel Dunmore, the head of the Internal Affairs Division, read it once, set it down, picked it up, and read it again, and then walked directly into Sheriff Braddock's office and told him they had a serious problem. The investigation that followed moved at a pace that the department had never seen before. Captain Dunmore pulled the dashcam footage. She watched it once. Then she watched it again. Then she brought in the department's legal counsel to watch it with her. The footage confirmed every single thing Marcus Coleman had written. There was no lane departure. The stop had no lawful basis. Holt had failed to state the reason for the stop when directly asked, a basic constitutional requirement. Holt had ordered the driver to exit the vehicle without articulating probable cause or placing him under arrest. Holt had destroyed the window of a private vehicle without legal justification. Holt had drawn his firearm on an unarmed person sitting calmly with hands visible on the steering wheel, with no threatening behavior and no criminal activity present. But there was something else in the footage that made this case even more serious. When Captain Dunmore reviewed Holt's body cam audio more carefully, she found a moment, early in the stop, before he even reached the window. In the 14 seconds between getting out of his cruiser and walking to Marcus's vehicle, Holt could be heard on the audio, muttering under his breath. The words were low, but clear enough for the department's audio enhancement team to isolate and confirm. What he said in those 14 seconds would become the most quoted part of the entire incident when the footage was eventually released to the public. It was 3 words, casual and contemptuous, and it removed any remaining doubt about the nature of this stop. It was not traffic enforcement. It was never traffic enforcement. The investigation took 11 days in total. 11 days from the filing of the complaint to the official findings. For a matter this serious, that was extraordinary speed. But the evidence was not complicated. Everything was documented, everything was on camera, everything was confirmed by the audio, everything was undeniable. The department's findings were released in a formal statement issued by Sheriff Braddock on a Friday morning. The findings confirmed that the stop lacked a lawful basis and constituted a violation of the subject's Fourth Amendment rights. They confirmed that the officer's failure to state the reason for the stop when asked was a violation of both departmental policy and established constitutional law. They confirmed that the destruction of the vehicle window constituted unlawful use of force against a non-threatening subject with no criminal history, no outstanding warrants, and no behavior justifying the action. They confirmed that the drawing of a service weapon against the subject subject was an unjustified use of deadly force, and the audio evidence confirmed that the basis of the stop was not traffic-related at all, but was rooted in a discriminatory judgment made before the officer ever left his vehicle. The department recommended termination. Derek Holt did not wait to be fired. He submitted his resignation that same Friday afternoon. His 12-year career with the Crestfield County Sheriff's Department ended because of 19 minutes on a dark road and one decision he made while walking from his cruiser to a car window. The footage was initially withheld from the public by the department, citing the ongoing investigation. Marcus Coleman's legal team filed a public records request within 72 hours of the incident. When the department delayed, his attorneys filed in court. A federal judge, a colleague of Marcus's from a neighboring district, granted the release order within 24 hours. The footage hit the internet on a Sunday evening, and by Monday morning, it had already been seen by 9 million people. By the end of the week, it was everywhere. Every major news network ran it. Every civil rights organization in the country issued a statement. Legal analysts broke it down frame by frame on television. Law school professors added it to their constitutional law syllabi as a case study in Fourth Amendment violations and racially pretextual traffic stops. Organizations that train public defenders used it in their workshops. The audio clip of those 3 words Holt muttered on his way to the car was shared millions of times on its own. The public reaction was enormous and divided in the way these things always are. Some people praised Marcus Coleman for staying calm, for knowing his rights, for refusing to comply with an unlawful order while keeping the situation from spiraling into something even more dangerous. Others criticized him, saying he should have simply gotten out of the car, that arguing with a police officer at night on a dark road is always dangerous, regardless of your credentials. Some said his calm was a luxury that not every black person in that situation would have been able to afford, and they were right. Others said that was exactly the point. But here is what nobody, not a single person across 42 million views and hundreds of thousands of comments, could genuinely dispute. Marcus Coleman had done nothing wrong. He had broken no law. He had made no threatening movement. He had asked a completely legal question and been met with a shattered window and a loaded gun. And he had handled it with more composure than most people could have managed with 100% assurance of their own safety, let alone in the dark with glass in their lap and a firearm pointed at their face. After the incident, the Crestfield County Sheriff's Department announced a series of departmental reforms. Officers would now be required to complete a refresher course on Fourth Amendment traffic stop law before the end of the calendar year. A new policy was enacted requiring officers to verbally state the reason for any traffic stop within the first 30 seconds of contact with a driver. The use of force policy was revised to add explicit language around the use of tactical tools and firearms against non-resisting subjects. The department also announced it would partner with an independent civil rights oversight organization to review and audit its traffic stop data for the previous 3 years. Essentially, they made their officers take the kind of course that Marcus Coleman could have taught himself. And when those officers sat down in that training room and watched the body cam footage from Meridian Boulevard as part of the curriculum, they watched it in silence. After the footage went viral, 4 other people came forward with complaints about Derek Holt specifically. 2 were traffic stop incidents with similar patterns. One involved a man who said Holt had searched his vehicle without consent and found nothing but had filed a report claiming the man had consented. Another was a woman who said Holt had followed her for 6 blocks after she left a store before pulling her over and spending 20 minutes demanding to know where she was going. None of these complaints had ever resulted in disciplinary action. None of them had been investigated seriously. Turns out this was not an isolated incident. Turns out Meridian Boulevard was not the first time. As of today, Marcus A. Coleman continues to serve as a United States Federal District Court judge. He has spoken publicly about the incident on 3 occasions, each time declining to center himself in the narrative and instead redirecting attention to the millions of people who face similar encounters without his credentials, his legal knowledge, or his institutional standing to compel accountability. He has become an outspoken advocate for federal oversight of pretextual traffic stops and has co-authored a legal brief calling for a national standard for dashcam and bodycam retention and public release. He has also established a legal education fund in his own family's name to provide free Know Your Rights workshops in underserved communities across the state. Derek Holt, as of the most recent public records available, is no longer employed in any law enforcement capacity. Here is a question for you before we close. If you were in Marcus Coleman's position that night, without the title, without the credentials, without the 27 years of legal expertise, would you have been able to stay that calm? Drop your answer in the comments. Let us talk about the bigger picture here, because this story is not really about Marcus Coleman and Derek Holt. It is about something much larger. This story is about the gap between who the law is supposed to protect and who it actually protects in practice. It is about the assumption of guilt that too many people carry with them every time they see flashing blue lights in their rearview mirror. And no, not because they have done anything wrong, but because of what they look like, that this stop could go very badly very fast. And it is about what happens when someone with the knowledge and the tools to demand accountability actually uses them. Most people do not know their rights during a traffic stop in detailed, practical, applicable terms. And some officers count on that. They count on people being too scared to ask questions, too intimidated to refuse unlawful commands, too worried about making things worse to push back against things that are already wrong. That dynamic has protected a lot of bad behavior for a very long time. But when you encounter someone like Marcus Coleman, someone who has spent decades studying the exact legal framework governing the encounter they are in, who knows precisely what an officer can and cannot do, who can name the case law and cite the statute in real time, the entire power dynamic shifts. The badge does not automatically win. The uniform does not automatically command submission. Knowledge becomes the equalizer. Some people, when this story circulated, said that Marcus Coleman's approach was reckless, that he endangered himself by refusing to comply, that no credentials are worth dying over. That is a real concern, and it deserves an honest answer. The risk Marcus Coleman took that night was real. No credential, no title, no amount of legal expertise makes a black man in America immune to the split-second decisions that can be made during an encounter like that one. Marcus knew that. He calculated it, and he made a decision rooted in the belief that the alternative, complying without question with an unlawful stop in the hope that compliance alone would keep him safe, was its own kind of risk. The fact that standing on your constitutional rights in a traffic stop is considered dangerous by many people tells you everything you need to know about the problem this story is really pointing at. So what should people take away from this? First, know your rights before you need them. The time to learn what an officer can and cannot legally demand from you during a traffic stop is not when you're already pulled over on a dark road. Learn it now, when you are calm and there are no stakes. Second, documentation is power. Marcus Coleman's 27-page complaint changed everything. Not because he was loud or aggressive, but because he was precise. The most effective accountability often sounds like paperwork. Third, stay calm, not just because it is safer, though it is, but because calm is strategic. It forces the other person to own every escalation, every raised voice, every aggressive action, every unlawful order stands alone and unambiguous on that footage when the other party never matches it. Fourth, your rights exist, whether or not the person in front of you respects them. The stop was unlawful whether or not Marcus had said a word about it. Knowing that does not mean the risk disappears, but it does mean that what happens can be documented, challenged, and addressed afterward. Fifth, accountability is possible, but it requires evidence. This case moved as fast as it did because the evidence was overwhelming and documented from multiple angles. Body cams, dash cams, and audio all told the same story. That footage was the foundation of everything that followed. One man, one traffic stop, 19 minutes, and a 12-year career, a departmental policy framework, and a national conversation about race and policing all changed because of it. That is the power of knowing the law. That is the importance of staying calm when someone wants you to panic. That is what happens when someone refuses to let an unlawful moment pass without a consequence attached to it. Final question for you. What is one thing you learned from this story that you did not know before? Drop it in the comments below. And if you got something from this, please share it, because the people who need to see it most are probably not going to find it on their own. This story matters not because of who Marcus Coleman is. It matters because of every person who has been pulled over for no lawful reason and never had the tools to do anything about it. It matters because of every complaint that was filed and ignored. It matters because of every encounter that ended badly with no footage, no record, and no accountability. It matters because accountability is possible, consequences are real, and knowledge is not just power in theory. Marcus Coleman proved it as power in practice. That is his legacy, not just what happened to Derek Holt, but showing millions of people who watched that footage that you can stay calm under extraordinary pressure. You can know your rights precisely and completely. You can demand accountability through the proper channels, and sometimes, not always, but sometimes you can win. This is the story of how a federal judge stayed silent while a cop shattered his window and then used every tool the law gave him to make sure that silence became the loudest thing in the room. But more than that, it is a story about the difference between having rights and knowing how to use them, and why that difference can change everything.